At a CRRC facility in Qingdao, on China's eastern coast, a train with no wheels touching the track just pushed past 600 kilometers an hour. Airplane-class speed, on the ground, and it quietly ended the 60-year story that Japan and its Shinkansen owned high-speed rail forever. If you want to understand China's biggest breakthroughs before the headlines catch up, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one will find you first. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how a train moving at 600 kilometers an hour floats, why lifting it off the rails is the entire trick, and why a 1-hour flight is about to become a pointless detour. I know exactly what you are thinking. A train with no wheels sounds like science fiction. Stay with me, because the physics is simpler than you would ever guess. Let me sit on that number for a second. 600 kilometers an hour. That is not a rounding error. That is not a slightly faster bullet train. That is airplane-class speed. At ground level, on a machine you could theoretically walk up to and step inside. And the wheels, the steel wheels that every train you have ever ridden depends on, are not gripping the rail. They are not even touching it. That single fact rewrites who leads high-speed rail on this planet, and almost nobody outside a few engineering circles is talking about it. To understand why that matters, you have to understand the story everyone believed for 60 years. For 6 decades, the world quietly assumed the bullet train had hit its ceiling. Japan's Shinkansen, the sleek white bullet that has been the symbol of the future since the 1960s, settled the debate. The future topped out somewhere around 320 kilometers an hour, and Japan owned it. That was just the way it was. The Shinkansen was fast. It was safe. It was the finish line. Nobody was seriously beating it, and most people stopped expecting anyone to try. So why did the ceiling sit there for 60 years? Because every train on Earth fights the same invisible enemy, and past a certain point, that enemy always wins. Its name is friction. Picture the fastest bullet train you have ever seen, and now picture the one thing physically stopping it from going faster. That thing has a name, and every train on Earth fights it. Steel wheels, pressing down on steel rails. It looks smooth from the platform, but up close, it is a war. The wheels grind. They heat up. At high speed, they scream. And here is the part that actually caps the whole thing. Past a certain speed, those steel wheels literally start to lose their grip on the steel rail. They begin to slip, to skate, to lose contact in tiny fractions of a second. Push harder, and the ride turns violent and unstable. That is the wall. That is the physical ceiling every high-speed train on Earth has slammed into, and no amount of engine power gets you cleanly through it. And it is not as if the smartest people alive did not notice. They did. Engineers in Germany and Japan spent a full generation chasing a way around friction. They understood the answer in theory decades ago. Get the train off the rails, and the war ends. But every attempt ran into brutal, real-world problems, staggering cost, guideways that were fearsomely expensive to build, systems that were hard to keep stable and safe at speed. Germany built test tracks. Japan poured billions into research. And for decades, real Maglev deployment stalled. Always almost there, never quite over the wall. Here is the uncomfortable truth this whole thing makes obvious. By the time a breakthrough like this reaches your feed, the real money and the real momentum have already moved. The headline is the last step, not the first. And if you only find out when everyone else does, you are already reacting to a shift that was priced in months ago. That gap is exactly what the China signal is built to close. It is a strategic guide that decodes what China is actually constructing, across energy, infrastructure, manufacturing, and transport, one sector at a time, so you can read the early signal of a shift like this maglev instead of scrambling after the fact. If you want to see where high-speed rail and next-generation tech are really heading, scan the code on screen or grab the link in the description. Now back to that wall. Because someone finally climbed it. Someone finally did the thing that turned back Germany and Japan for a generation. And the trick that got them over is almost embarrassingly simple. Not a bigger engine, not some exotic new metal, something much more basic. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And that is really what this story is about. It was never just a train. It is a story about who gets to build the future, and about what that costs the players who assumed they had already won it. The companies that owned high-speed rail. The country that treated 320 kilometers an hour as a permanent finish line. All of it, quietly, is being rewritten in a coastal city most people outside China have never thought about twice. So how does a train beat the one wall, friction, that turned back Germany and Japan for a generation? The answer is the single thing a steel wheel can never do. This train never touches the track at all. Not once. Not anywhere. It never touches the track. Not once. Not anywhere. And that single fact is the entire secret. Take away the steel wheel pressing on the steel rail, and you take away friction itself, the wall that stopped everyone. So the obvious question becomes the good one. If nothing is touching, what is holding a 50-ton train car up in the air? Magnets. That is the whole answer. And I promise it is simpler than it sounds. Under the belly of this train sits a row of powerful electromagnets, basically magnets you can switch on and off with electricity. Beneath them runs a special guideway, not an ordinary rail, but a shaped track built to work with those magnets. Switch them on the right way, and the two push against each other. Hard. The train rises a small gap off the guideway and just hangs there, floating on a cushion of nothing but magnetic force. You already know this feeling in your own hands. Take two ordinary magnets and try to press the wrong ends together. They fight you. They shove apart. And no matter how hard you push, they refuse to touch. Now scale that shove up. Way up. Strong enough to lift an entire train car off the ground and hold it there. Hold that picture for a second. Two magnets shoving each other apart in your hand. Now scale that push up until it lifts a train. That is it. That is the whole magic trick, and it isn't magic at all. So floating solves one half of the problem. But a floating train that just sits there is a very expensive way to hover. You still have to move it, and you have to move it fast. Here is the second trick, and it uses the same idea. A separate set of magnets, built into the guideway itself, switches on and off in a rolling wave down the track. Each pulse pulls the floating car forward toward the next one, then hands it off to the pulse after that. It is like an invisible hand sliding the car along a slot, catching it and letting go, catching it and letting go, faster and faster. No engine roaring, no wheels spinning, nothing grinding against anything. And that is why the speed just keeps climbing. Think back to the wall. A normal steel wheel train has a ceiling, somewhere around 320 kilometers an hour, because past that point, the wheels start losing their grip on the rail, and the whole thing gets unstable. That ceiling was never really about engine power. It was about friction, about contact, about steel screaming on steel. Pull the wheels off the track completely, and the ceiling doesn't move higher. It disappears. There is no wheel left to lose its grip, because there is no wheel touching anything at all. So now the reveal, with real names attached. This is CRRC's high-speed Maglev, CRRC being China's giant state rail builder. And it was rolled out in Qingdao, a port city on China's eastern coast, back in 2021. It was engineered for a 600-kilometer-an-hour commercial cruise, not a lab stunt on a closed loop. A speed meant to carry paying passengers city to city, day after day. 600, on the ground. That is airplane class, and it is the kind of number that makes you want to just stop and hand China the trophy. And here is where a lot of channels would just take the win. I won't, because the honest version is actually more interesting. Because China is not first to that number. It never was. Japan's SC Maglev, running on a test track in Yamanashi, has actually hit 603 kilometers an hour in a test run. 3 more than the Chinese figure. So let's be clear and fair about it. On the raw speedometer, on the pure top speed bragging right, Japan got there first. Credit where it is genuinely due. So if Japan holds the record, why are we even talking about China? Because the record is not the point. The point is what you do with it. Japan's line is still under construction. It has been for years, tangled in cost overruns and tunneling fights, a magnificent machine still waiting for a finished track to run on. China took a different swing. It built its Maglev as a deployable system, a train designed to be manufactured, rolled out, and dropped onto real corridors, with test lines planned to link actual megacities. One country chased the fastest possible number on a test bench. The other is trying to turn the technology into a train you could someday buy a ticket for. Those are not the same achievement, and honestly, the second one is harder. And I have to put the caveat right here, because this channel does not skip it. A lot of that timeline, the rollout dates, the corridor plans, the promises about what comes next, comes through Chinese state media. So a little healthy skepticism is not just fair. It is the smart way to read any of this. Some of those dates may slip. Some of those corridors may stay lines on a map for a while. Take the schedule with a grain of salt. But strip all the skepticism away, and you are still left with something that does not move. The train exists. It was built. It sits in Qingdao, engineered for 600, and that part cannot be walked back. This is how a technology curve works, flat for half a century, while everyone insists the ceiling is fixed, and then a wheelless machine floats past the ceiling like it was never there. But 600 kilometers an hour is just a number on a test board until it lands in your own life. And it lands hardest on one specific route. Roughly 1,200 kilometers between Beijing and Shanghai, the exact trip that airlines quietly make their money on. So let's actually run that trip. Beijing to Shanghai, roughly 1,200 kilometers, the exact corridor airlines quietly built their profits on. On the numbers, this Maglev closes that gap in about 2.5 hours, door to door. Not gate to gate, not runway to runway. City center to city center. From one downtown platform straight into the heart of the other city. Now put a plane next to it and be honest about what flying actually costs you. Not the ticket. The time. You show up at the airport an hour or two early, because you always do. You stand in the security line, take off your shoes, empty your pockets. You wait to board. You board. Then you sit on the tarmac while the thing taxis and queues and finally lifts off. The flight itself might only be an hour. But the airport is nowhere near the city. So on both ends, you add a long ride in from some field on the edge of nowhere. Think about your last 1-hour flight. Now add the 2 hours around it that nobody counts. That gap, that dead time wrapped around the fast part, is exactly where this train wins. Because the Maglev doesn't have any of that. There's no distant airport, No security theater, no taxiing. You walk into a station in the middle of Beijing, and you walk out in the middle of Shanghai. And the clock says about 2.5 hours the whole way through. Line the two up, count everything honestly, and the train beats the plane on this run, not by a hair, by the whole margin that used to make flying feel fast. And that is the moment the whole thing flips. The 1-hour short-haul flight, the little hop between two big cities, becomes a detour nobody chooses. Why would you? Why would you drive out to an airport, strip down its security, and sit on a runway, just to shave nothing off a trip a floating train already does faster and calmer? You wouldn't. Nobody would. The flight doesn't get banned. It just quietly stops making sense. Here's why that lands so much harder than it sounds. That short hop, the 1-hour intercity flight, is exactly the flight airlines quietly make their money on. High frequency, business travelers, full planes, day after day. It's the bread and butter. Now imagine killing that, not on one route, but on route after route, every city pair close enough for a floating train to link. You're not just canceling some flights. You're pulling the profitable core out from under a whole way of moving people, and you're reshaping travel itself. And it doesn't stop at plane tickets. Fewer short-haul flights means fewer jets burning kerosene on quick hops, which cuts aviation fuel demand in a very real way. Picture the fuel truck that pulls up to a plane before every departure. Now picture a big share of those departures simply gone. All that energy doesn't vanish, it moves. It shifts off jet kerosene and onto the electric grid, because a maglev runs on electricity, and electricity can come from a reactor or a solar farm or a wind line. You've quietly turned a chunk of air travel into rail travel that plugs into the wall. And that is where this stops being a travel story and becomes a power story. Because whoever can actually build and export a deployable 600-kilometer-an-hour system owns something the rest of the world has to answer, not just admire from a distance. For a long time, high-speed rail was a thing you bought from Japan or from Europe. Their trains, their engineering, their badge on the platform. A working maglev the West can't match on speed flips that. It hands China a transport-export, a product it can sell into other countries' futures, and that is a very different kind of leverage than a fast train at home. The established players don't get to just nod politely at this one. They have to respond. Now the honesty, because this channel doesn't skip it. Those cross-country corridors linking the megacities are still mostly planned, not running. A lot of the timeline, the promises about where the lines go and when, comes through Chinese state media, so keep that healthy pinch of skepticism. Nobody's riding this thing from Beijing to Shanghai tomorrow morning. But separate the plan from the machine. The corridors are a claim. The train is not. The train exists. It was built. It rolled out in Qingdao. And it floats right now. And that part cannot be walked back. And remember what made all of it possible. One trick. The train never touches the track. Take away the steel wheel grinding on steel rail. Take away friction. The wall every normal train slams into somewhere past 300 kilometers an hour, and the ceiling that trapped this technology for 2 generations just isn't there anymore. Remove the wall, and the speed keeps climbing until a train is doing the work of a plane. Everything in this story, the 2.5-hour trip, the dead flight, the shifting fuel, the export, all of it comes back to that one small gap of air underneath the car. So let it land. The steel wheel era is over a century old. Trains have rolled on metal wheels on metal rails since before your great-grandparents were born, and for the longest time, it looked like that was simply how trains worked, forever. The technology that replaces it is floating in Qingdao today, wheels off the ground, quietly doing 600 kilometers an hour. And this is how technology curves work. They look flat for a very, very long time. 60 years of bullet trains stuck near the same ceiling. Everyone's sure the future belonged to Japan. Flat, flat, flat. And then, all at once, not flat at all. The bend already happened. You just got to see it before the headlines did. So now, I want to hear from you. When these corridors go live, and the short flights start quietly disappearing off the departure boards, which city pair do you think loses its flights first? Drop it below.